tangent. In the previous videos, I went over using cosine and sine in real-world applications, going from trees to mountains and so on. Now, there's a lot of applications for sine and cosine, especially for things like engineering and science and physics, and sometimes even like chemistry and stuff like that. Well, maybe chemistry, but it's more likely to see that in heavy math and engineering fields and science fields like those I just mentioned. But today we're going to be looking at some simpler examples of how to use and where you could use tangent in the real world. So let's look at tangent again. Let's refresh our minds. So we know that tangent, T-A-N, of theta, so tangent of an angle, is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. It's important to remember that the theta here is the input of the function, and the input of these trig functions are angles. Or at least for cosine, sine, and tangent, the input is an angle. And you will understand why I strictly highlight those and not any other trigonometric functions. And there are indeed more trig functions, which you will see later. But let's just focus on tangent here. So let's get into a more real-world application here for tangent. So let's say you're out on a drive and you're kind of like out in the forest. Maybe you're taking a big drive in the woods or something like that. And there's actually some decent roads. So imagine you're driving down this road and you kind of and you're looking on your map. And you see some roads like this that kind of form this triangle. And let's say you, let me make that black. Sorry, I didn't mean to make that red. So let's say you are right here at point A. And let's say you drove all the way to point B. Now let's say from point A to point B, this is, 30 miles. So 30 miles. So you drove quite a bit distance. Now, let's say you have, we'll say you have 45 miles of gas left. So 45 miles of gas left. So you have 45 miles of gas left. So you can drive 45 miles until you're out of gas. Now let's say you're looking on this map and you see a gas station right here, but you have to make it to this intersection before you pull off into this gas station. So now you need to figure out, well, if I have 45 miles of gas, how long is this distance that I labeled X here, and how am I going to make it to the gas station in time? Now, let's say coincidentally you had a protractor and you measured the angle between these two roads and it came out to be 36 degrees. And let's say that's just right. Like in reality, the difference between the two roads, the angle between the two roads is 36 degrees. We'll just say that. So how are we going to figure out X? Well, most people, some people might say, oh, you can also use cosine and sine. Well, unfortunately you can't, and here's why. So remember, sine of theta, so sine of an angle, is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. And cosine of theta is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Now you can see that both ratios involve the hypotenuse. Well, we know that this angled line here that I'm kind of going over, this angled line that I kind of scribbled over, that is the hypotenuse, right? So we're going to say this is H, right? Well, here's the thing. We're not trying to solve for the hypotenuse, right? We don't need to solve for the hypotenuse. We want to solve for the opposite side, the side that's opposite to the angle, right? So we want to solve for O. Well, you could say, oh, you can use sine, but sine involves the opposite in the hypotenuse, right? But we don't have any information about the hypotenuse, but we have information about the adjacent side. Well, you can't use cosine because, again, has the hypotenuse, and we're not dealing with the hypotenuse here. We're dealing with the opposite and the opposite and the adjacent side here. So we can rule out that you can't use sine or cosine here. So now we need to figure out, using tangent, what's the difference, the distance between point B and we'll say now point C. So we need to find the distance of point B to point C, or x, right? We need to solve for x and see if we have enough gas left. Well, first we can say tangent, and we can input our angle here. Well, our angle that we're going to be inputting is 36. So tangent of 36 is equal to, now the opposite side, which the opposite side of the angle is x. So x. And then the adjacent side of the angle is 30 miles, but we're just going to write 30. And now we have this little equation. Now, how do we solve for x? Well, in the previous videos, we can set up the equation for cross multiplication. So this can simplify, well, not simplify, but this can turn into tangent of 36 divided by 1, which is the same thing as x over 30. And then we can cross multiply. So 1 times x, all right, that's just x. And then 30 times tangent 36. So 30 times tangent of 36. All right. Now, if I were to pull out my calculator and I would say 30 multiplied tangent of 36, that's about 21.8. So 21.8. So we know that x is equal to 21.79 approximately. But this could just, you could just say x is approximately 21.8 miles, since that's our unit. So now we know that this is now 28, or not 28, apologies. This is 21.8 miles, right? But do we have enough gas? Well, yes, we do, because we could travel 45 miles with the amount of gas we have, and the distance that we need to travel is only 21.8 miles. And in fact, if we did the math here, 45 subtract 21.8, and I unfortunately am not good with mental math with decimals, 21.8, we have 23.2 miles of gas left. So 23.2 miles of gas left in the tank once we reach the gas station here. So in terms, we do have enough gas to try to make this distance, and that is how we can use tangent in the real world. And in some cases, you might actually have to do this. I don't think many people just have protractors and road maps on them, but if you ever do come in this situation, I guess you know now how to use tangent to figure out road lengths, I guess. So that is how you use tangent in the real world. That's a very simple and basic example of how you would use tangent in the real world. And there's many more complicated situations where you can use tangent in the real world for solving real problems. But this is just a simple overview of how to use tangent.